Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Gordon Denlinger of the 99th District in Lancaster County. One of the biggest and most important challenges facing the state legislature each year is the adoption of a budget. Governor Corbett has proposed a budget that holds the line on spending. It's now the legislature's job to craft a spending plan for the next fiscal year. Joining me now to discuss this year's budget is Republican Whip Representative Stan Saylor from York County. Representative Saylor, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Great to join you today, and obviously you're a veteran of many budgets, and I'm a veteran of a few. Great to spend a little time with you here as we talk through this year's budget and catch up on some of the significant issues of our time. Share a little of your background with our viewers, if you would, please.
Well, before I came to the legislature, I was a small businessman. I had a plastering company in York County in my hometown of Red Lion. And before that, I'd worked for different construction companies, American chain and cable companies, so very much involved in the business community over the years, and really got a great interest in how government's running because, as a small businessman and working in industry, you see how government affects you every day, even though you would think it doesn't, but it does.
So you saw tax policy and regulations and the whole gamut there and the impact.
Absolutely. The regulations were so burdensome. Even if you worked in the community with charities and stuff that you did, a lot of times you were trying to meet government regulations. So it didn't matter what walk of life you were working in, regulations seemed to cause you problems all the time. There
it is. Well, I know, and you were a longtime member of the House Appropriations Committee. I serve on there, and you did, I believe, for 12 years. Am I correct with that? Okay. Why don't you take us through the start of the process and how things will move forward here?
Well, of course, as you know, as one of our senior members on the Appropriations Committee, the governor introduces his budget in February of every year, and then the process starts where the House and the Senate has budget hearings. And members like yourself help lead that discussion as we go through. The secretaries and the bureaus come in and testify. And that's very critical because a lot of us as members of the General Assembly don't get kind of the inside scoop on how the governor drew that budget up. And we sometimes don't always agree on exactly where the cuts or where the increases go. So we have an opportunity, and you do at this point as one of our senior members, in leading that discussion about exactly why cuts were made, what's going on, why the increases, and exactly where the spending's going, and what are they doing to fix some of the problems that are in each of the agencies and bureaus. Mm-hmm. So at the end of that, then, by what you have done, myself as Majority Whip and our Speaker and Majority Leaders Mike Turzai and Billy Adolph, who's our Appropriations Committee Chairman, we get to meet with the Senate and the Governor to start negotiating after the fact-finding that you come back with us with the report.
Okay, and how important is member input to this process? Rank-and-file members from all across Pennsylvania, they're weighing in with you as a leader, other members of leadership. How important is that?
It's critical because not only from the point of, I come from York County. And I hear what people in York County agencies, government, any number of people, business community are commenting on. But it's good to have a perspective because counties are different from one end of the state to the other, and interests are a little bit different. So those member input to me, and particularly something like yours from Lancaster County as close neighbors that we are, mean a lot to me from the fact of I know what's affecting you and how it's affecting me. In York County of our legislators and our communities. So I can then go to the governor and say, Governor, do you understand what this is going to do? And as I talk to the Senate leaders and our Republican team here in the House, as we move forward, we're able to use that input to help make sure that all of the state has their input into what are the most critical parts of the budget, increase and decrease wise.
Very good. Now, you mentioned the beginning of the process, obviously, is the governor's joint session address. And from your perspective, what do you view, I'm going to ask you kind of two sides of a question here. What do you view as the biggest challenges in this year's state budget? So we'll start with the challenges, and then what do you view as the positives, or what are the strengths in this year's budget effort?
Well, I see two negatives, I guess I would say, is always, of course, the income. At this point in time, we're running a deficit. The governor's projecting something in the neighborhood of about $700 million deficit. We think, based upon our own group forecasting, it's $500 million, and as we go, the positive side, and of course one other negative that I think all people are hearing because of property taxes and issues like that is the funding allocation for public schools K through 12. So I think all members are concerned about education funding from there to higher ed, but in particular our K through 12. The positive side is we've seen some changes in the stock market recently that are very positive. But we have not seen that translate into dollars at this point for our state revenues, but it's hopeful. Hopeful between now and time when we get this budget done That will mean additional revenues, and hopefully we won't be down a few $100 million. Also, the other positive side, I think, is that at some point, the things that we have already done, lawsuit abuse, the issue of controlling our debt and our spending, will bring jobs in as well that we'll see coming here this spring. So those are the positive things that may have a real positive effect on helping you and I craft a budget that is more friendly to what Pennsylvanians would like to see spent.
Absolutely. I guess probably one of the really wise things that our forebears put in place was a balanced budget amendment. And so, unlike Washington, we actually have to balance our books at the end of the day, and we can't borrow for routine operations, so we don't have the growing trillions in debt that they do down in Washington. Beyond that, obviously higher ed funding is a point of a lot of focus at this point. What's your take on that as we move on through? I guess, what are we talking about there in terms of the initial cut, and then where you think that might go?
Well, I think the governor's trying to send a message to our college universities that get a lot of money from our state budget. And that is, look, some of them have been building a lot of projects going on during this recession. You need to stop that. The money we're giving you is to be paid towards student tuition. Number two, he has seen, as we've seen in appropriations hearings, a lot of students, about 30% of the students at some of these state schools, who are not graduating in 4 years. And it's the college's fault. It's not the student. We're not talking about a student who changes their major. We're talking about a student who has not changed anything. But the courses aren't available for that student to graduate in 4 years. And I think the governor is sending a message saying, look, every family who sends a child or 2 children off to college has a budget. And they borrow money, they take it out of their savings, whatever it may be. You need to live up to your commitment that that student will graduate in 4 years. And I think he's sending a subtle message by the way he's crafted this budget on higher ed. So our hope is that that cut that he has proposed will be less than that. I don't really know what that figure may be yet. I think it still depends on the revenues that come in between now and June. But I think we'll not have as deep a cut for higher ed. But I do think the governor's trying to send a very clear message to those who run our universities. Live within your means, and more importantly, live up to your word with the students.
It is amazing when you drive around some of the campuses. There's a lot of shiny new buildings that have been built, which, you know, you need to do some of that. But how much and how far into the taxpayer should we go to fund those efforts? And in, you know, I'm Lancaster County, you're York County. I guess Millersville would be sort of between you and I geographically. And are there other state-related state-owns that York County particularly?
Shippensburg is very close to the west of us as well. So we have a lot of students that are concerned, but I think as Lancaster County and York, even though we have Millersville and Shippensburg around us, a lot of our students go to IUP, to any number of other schools in the state, because it depends on the majors. Penn State, not as many to Temple and Pitt, but it does come down to that the parents are concerned and they're wondering why the cuts, and I've had to explain to them the governor wants to send a message, and that is live within your means. We're at tough economic times. Nobody should be sloughing off the dollars as if it's the same old as in the past. It's a new day in Pennsylvania.
And another one that's always a challenge for policymakers is the social services welfare lines within the budget. Would appreciate kind of your take on that whole realm and where you think we might be going there.
Well, you know, as policy chairman, prior to being elected majority whip, we did a lot of research, and before that, Representative Turzai, who's now the majority leader, did a lot of research as well, and we're finding a lot of fraud and abuse and duplication in the welfare department and others. The thing that we discovered, and it hit me home, because just in the last month and a half, I've had a local store employees come up to me and say, Stan, I had a woman here the other day that had 2 Pennsylvania food stamp cards. Then there was another case where one had a West Virginia and a Pennsylvania food stamp card. Okay. So some people say, oh, there's no fraud. Well, just in a month, employees at one store told me about these frauds that's going on. So it really now says to me, I'm not wrong. You're not wrong. The governor's not wrong. There is a lot of fraud and abuse in these programs.
And that's an excellent point. And I think sometimes people in the community don't realize that the federal government does monitor how closely we are reviewing, auditing, detecting fraud within our own system. And I think we're under some degree of penalty, as the DPW Secretary Alexander mentioned. We had a lot of years where things were kind of left slide, if you will.
Absolutely.
And so good to hear that you're particularly engaged in that issue as well. As we get into the process, it all becomes about priorities at the end of the day, similar to a family budget or a small business. Do you view this as a particularly rough year in terms of the key parties getting to the table and kind of hashing it out, or I guess the deeper question, on time or late or early?
Oh, absolutely, it'll be on time. Okay. This budget's a tough year. I don't think it's as tough as last year, but it's still tough decisions to be made when you don't have the revenue coming in. I think that what we did last year and some of the cuts makes this year's budget a little easier, although we still have some cuts because the economy has not turned around. Also, I think that we have to understand, and everybody has to understand, families in Pennsylvania are having hard times, losing homes, unemployed, and truthfully, we lost $7 billion from the federal government in the last 2 years. And what that equates out to is the average...
That would be the stimulus dollars.
Stimulus dollars that we got from Washington. Those dollars, as of now, are gone. And so with the new budget being crafted, if we were to decide, you and I and the rest of the General Assembly, that we were going to replace those dollars, on a person who makes $50,000 a year, we would have to increase their taxes by $1,200 a year in their personal income tax. That is a tremendous burden on people of Pennsylvania. And if you're, today, that's just not affordable. We cannot ask people of Pennsylvania to pay $1,200 more a year to take and replace those federal dollars. And, I know your district is very similar to mine. You have hardworking, blue-collar families who are trying and struggling to keep their homes, and send their kids off to college, or prepare to send their kids off to college as they're getting older. And $1,200 has a great impact on the budget of paying the utility bills, the mortgage, and of course putting food on the table as well.
Well, our time's growing short on this first segment, but you've moved into the area of tax policy, and would you want to share with our viewers of any tax increases or where this budget stands on taxes? Well,
we're not going to increase taxes on Pennsylvania. That is something we here in the House Republican caucus have made very clear. We will not. I believe that's generally the governor's approach. He's been pretty clear. He doesn't want those either. And my understanding, and I'm not a mind reader in the Senate, but I think they're in the same position. So I don't think people of Pennsylvania should expect any kind of a tax increase from the General Assembly this year in this budget. We're trying to do some tweaking and some minor cuts for the business community in certain areas to help them continue to grow jobs, because I think that's the #1 issue here. Raising taxes loses jobs.
Okay, very good. Well, appreciate that insight into the budget. We'll come back with some more topics in just a moment, but let's take a short break. Legislative Report will return in a moment.
Did you know that Act 16 of 1999 honors one of the greatest leaders in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives? The Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building, once known as the Capitol Annex, is located next to the main Capitol building and honors the late Speaker of the House, Matthew J. Ryan. Those who visit this building will observe the magnificent architectural designs providing eloquence and grandeur to the building. Known as one of the greatest members in the history of the Pennsylvania State House, Matthew Ryan started his career in the legislature in 1963 and was elected Speaker in 1981. His charisma and knowledge will forever be reflected in the building now named after this great legislative leader. Now you know. Did you know that Fort Indiantown Gap, located in Lebanon County, is home to Pennsylvania's only Veterans Memorial? C.J. Frederick of Westchester, Bucks County, submitted the winning design that now honors those men and women who have sacrificed their lives in defending this great country. Dedicated to the Commonwealth on October 7, 2001, the Veterans Memorial is surrounded by freestanding walls and houses an amphitheater, which can accommodate large crowds during an event. Strategically placed in the front of the amphitheater is a tomb that reminds visitors of those who gave their lives protecting the freedoms of this nation. The design suggests a war-damaged structure in which Frederick wanted to impress upon those visiting the horrific arena of war. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative Gordon Denlinger. I'm pleased to have as my guest Representative Stan Saylor, Republican House Whip. And we're discussing the state budget and several other key policy issues. Stan, welcome again. Good to be with you here today. Some other issues, we talked about the budget for a while, some other issues that are significant. Folks out there are aware that the reapportionment situation has kind of blown up here in the state capitol. Can you kind of take us through what happened and where we stand at this point?
Well, we had proposed a map that had a vote of 4 to 1 pass the Bipartisan Management Committee. We had the House Democrats and the House Republicans, the Senate Republicans, and the chairman, who was appointed by the Supreme Court, agree to a plan with only the Senate Democrats opposing it. Mm-hmm. When it got to the Supreme Court, some people had filed a contest as to the geographic drawing of those lines in some cases, and the justices decided, some of them decided that they wanted to see the lines changed. They thought they were not quite as concise as they would like to see, and they've seen some townships and municipalities split more than they would like to see. The biggest problem you have in drawing up a reapportionment map is one man, one vote. And that means you can't have 5,000 more people in one district than you can have in another. And we at the state capitol here don't draw up voting precincts. Mm-hmm. We basically go based upon what each county has as their voting precincts, and some precincts may have 3,000 to 4,000 people in them. Others may only have 150 in them. Mm-hmm. So when you're drawing lines and trying to shift around, you're trying to keep that one man, one vote into perspective. Mm-hmm.
And just to put a little finer point on that, I guess, based on the 2001 map, the old map, we have some districts that have 70,000 residents and some that only have 50,000. So proportionally, in terms of representation, the folks that only have 50,000, they're getting a little more bang for their buck than the ones that have 70,000.
Absolutely. And the great thing for you and I in Central Pennsylvania is we're picking up about 3 or 4 new seats. So Central Pennsylvania will have more input into future legislatures once this map and reapportionment is agreed to. And that's great for Central Pennsylvanians, Republicans and Democrats alike, because they will now have more votes here at the state capitol to get things done that are for Central Pennsylvania there.
Well, and that's a great point. You mentioned presumably because of population growth over in your county, your home base, I think you folks probably will end up adding a seat over there. Is that likely?
Right, absolutely. We're picking up one new seat there. There's a new seat up in Berks County in the Reading area.
Right.
And so as we grow here in Central Pennsylvania, we're gaining more influence here in the General Assembly.
Right, but that comes at the expense of some other areas. So those seats are moving from the cities, the urban areas out, and some, I guess, from the northern tier down. Is that would be
absolutely true? And the biggest problem is when you take a seat that had, in most cases, a lot of times now it's down to 50,000. That's why you're moving the seat, and these other seats around it are losing population as well. You're trying to bring these in to take up the people who you now left without a seat. So that working together to combine these seats and make sure that they're equally represented in every district, 203 House seats, it gets to be very difficult.
I think some folks, they get the idea this is just a rough political exercise of raw political power, but really it is a constitutional mandate, and so the point here, it's about population shifts at the end of the day.
Right. You really, to get this done, I sometimes wonder if some of these people don't have nightmares at night with statistics going through their head. How many are in this precinct? It's not just about how many are in a township, but how many are in each precinct. I mean, in York County, we have 2 or 3 townships that have 15 precincts.
Okay.
So when you're trying to split up, and every precinct has a different amount, because when they create these voting precincts, they don't all have the same amount of voters in them. So
thank goodness for computer technology that
absolutely
enables us to move the map around. Another key issue that I know you've been central on is the development of the natural gas sector. Obviously, the Marcellus Shale thing in northern western PA is huge. But you focused in on vehicles and building some infrastructure. Can you tell us about your legislative ideas and the broader issue?
Sure, and you even been a part of that in helping us sponsor some legislation. Is that one of the things that's so great about having our own natural resources in Pennsylvania used? We've seen this winter not only have heating bills going down because of the temperatures being a lot warmer, but on the average, for instance, one company, Columbia Gas, which serves my county, lowered the average bill between $20 and $30 just because the cost of natural gas went down so much. We're seeing here in Pennsylvania jobs being created, not just in the northern part of the state where the drilling is taking place, but we're seeing jobs in Lancaster and York and all parts of the state from this great explosion of natural gas. What we want to do now is save taxpayers' dollars. We want Pennsylvania resources to be utilized for Pennsylvania. So we have legislation in that's going to be utilized and signed into law now by the governor as part of this program, where we will see hopefully mass transit and school buses and others converted over to natural gas. When you think that you're spending $4, and some people are talking about $5 for diesel fuel and higher even this summer, and you're only spending $1.80 to $2 for natural gas a gallon, So that's a big difference.
Starts to make sense to do the switchover. It really
Absolutely.
does.
I mean, think of the money that mass transit systems will save. That right now, when they're asking you and I to raise taxes so they can provide more services or at least maintain the same services, they not only can use those extra dollars to either expand routes, to cut rates if they want for mass transit, and school buses. School districts are, busing costs are huge for our counties because we have large counties and some rural areas. Busing is a major cost to school districts in their budgets. This will help save the taxpayers some dollars in property taxes as well by converting those school buses over to natural gas. But we're seeing in Pennsylvania already incentives where we have waste management companies, garbage trucks who are using natural gas.
Okay.
And as we do that, as we continue using that, it's going to lower the cost.
Well, then, the first push obviously is the major fleets, governmental buses and maybe large businesses, waste management, some others. Do you envision a day when we're going to pull up to the Sheetz station or whatever, and we're going to be hooking up the natural gas and running our vehicles, our personal vehicles on natural gas?
I do. I don't know how long that's going to take. I say it's 5, 10 years, maybe 10 years before we do that.
Okay.
The key for us is to get the infrastructure put in place, and that takes time. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is we're not looking for corporate welfare. We don't want to be funding all these programs out of taxpayers' dollars. What we want to do is help get it started, kickstart the program so that as it flows. I'm a real believer in the free market and free enterprise. And that means once it's up and running and people have the ability, they can make the judgments. And as they make these judgments, they're going to choose cleaner and cheaper energy. We're cleaning up our air. You and I, every time we go get our cars inspected, we're getting that little sticker that goes on our car, and I sometimes wonder if it really has any impact on the air pollution that's in our area. I think eventually we can get rid of that. Here in Allentown, just north of here, north of Lancaster, Mack Volvo builds those natural gas engines for tractor trailers. So we're seeing fleets of tractor trailers across this country now convert to natural gas, which means cheaper goods. Right now, with the rising cost of diesel fuel, the food we buy, the pharmaceuticals, everything we buy that's shipped by truck, which is almost everything today, is rising in cost simply because of the transportation cost. Natural gas now will be a major competitor. And we're going to build that infrastructure here in Pennsylvania along the interstates and eventually in our own hometowns. We're already seeing that take place in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania and some in the southwestern part of the state around Pittsburgh. New stations are being built and they are open to the public to use. It's just they're not on every street corner yet.
Well, you had mentioned at one point that it prices out at about $2 a gallon for LNG, liquefied natural gas. And, hey, I'd like to fill up for $2 a gallon. I know there's a lot of folks watching who would like the same thing. So that day probably can't come soon enough for all of us. And I guess really it's about supply and demand at the end of the day. We just have so much natural gas under this state that to not utilize it would be a huge mistake for our state. And so appreciate your leadership on that issue and helping to move it forward.
Even on Marcellus Shale, we have what people talk about 50 to 100-year supply, and who knows what that is. But the great news is below the Marcellus Shale is Utica Shale. So we have another gas supply right here in Pennsylvania.
Another layer under there.
A whole other layer.
Okay, very good. One of the other ones that we had 3 days of debate on, I guess, in the House here recently was the voter ID issue. And I think listeners would enjoy just hearing your perspective on that legislation, what changes it might mean for them when they go into the polling place and how soon they should expect that.
Well, in the primary, you need a photo ID, a driver's license or a card that identifies you as a Pennsylvanian. You can get, if you don't have a driver's license, you can get one free from the Department of Transportation. Just walk in and they'll give you a free card right now. It's already in effect. The key thing has been that we've seen in Pennsylvania has been indictments that have come down for voter fraud. Some people, it was interesting listening to the debate on the House floor because I had 2 Democratic state reps. In fact, one I'm actually introduced from Philadelphia, introduced a voter ID program of his own. But I had Democrats from Philadelphia complaining to me that they felt the ballot boxes in primaries in particular, if they weren't aligned with the Democratic Party, and of course they were on the Democratic ticket, the ballot boxes were being stuffed against them because of fraud.
So you have to play with the machine or else.
Right, and so I feel that this will help that. Are there ways around this law? I guess if somebody wants to cheat, they're going to cheat a little bit. But again, there are penalties in this bill. And the great thing is, I talked to my mom, who, I shouldn't say this, but is going to turn 76 here in a few weeks. And she's like, what does she mean? What are they saying that we senior citizens don't have ID? I need one to check cash checks and everything else. And I think the debate on the House floor made it sound like people were stupid. And that's embarrassing because I think people out there are very smart and very intelligent in this state. That's one of the reasons that we've done as well as we have done, is people in Pennsylvania are hardworking citizens. veterans. And when they retire, they're out helping other seniors. You know, I joke all the time. I go into the senior centers and I see somebody who's 80 years old helping somebody who's 65 or 67 years old. And so it's hilarious because our seniors are very intelligent. And the way we have set up our Department of Transportation sites around this state, they're not that hard to get to. And I think all the legislators, Democrats and Republicans alike, legislative officers will be helping get these IDs for the voters. But in the primary, you'll be asked to have one for the fall election when you come in. So voters will be asked. They'll also be notified by the mail.
So this coming fall, the general election, will be the first time that this goes into effect. And I know there were some added IDs that were put in as amendments over on the Senate side, I believe, when they looked at it. Can you share with us which ones were added?
Sure. I don't know if I remember all of them, but if you're a retired military, you get, when you retire, Department of Defense photo ID. And you and your siblings or spouses and so stuff get those cards. And they have a date on them, and they're able to be used. The VA card will not because it doesn't have an expiration date on it. But the Department of Defense contracts are for all military personnel. We're going to allow some of the different other photo IDs that have expiration dates on them to be utilized as well. And so the scarcity that some people have been trying to scare voters that we're going to deny people voters in Pennsylvania is just not true.
I think, if I may, one of the favorite ones, you mentioned your mom. I have a mother who's 92 years young, and she resides in a retirement community over in Lancaster County. Retirement community IDs that have a photo and an expiration will be acceptable as well. So if they've given up driving and maybe let those licenses expire, their ID right in the nursing facility or retirement community will be acceptable. College IDs as well. So yeah, exactly.
And I have, in my church, I have two ladies who are 100 years old, and they don't drive anymore. I think they still have their driver's license, both of them.
Do they vote for Stan? That's the question.
I think they do. But,
okay.
But it really, it's great. When you talk to these senior citizens, and I say anybody else, people understand today. You can't do anything without a photo ID. You know, sometimes you go to a store, they ask you for photo ID, a bank to cash a check, or even in a store to cash a check, wherever it may be. So it's just unbelievable people are trying to mock this. The truth of it is, what I found is those who, particularly liberals, I hate to say that, but most liberals who believe the system is okay to cheat. And that's really what they're saying. Because you can't have people in 1 minute say about ballot boxes being stuffed. We had a case in Montgomery County where a woman running for the state legislature voted in Philadelphia and voted in her legislative seat out in Montgomery County a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we've had legislators who've gone in to vote.
Tragic. Absolutely.
And they were already voted before they even cast their first vote.
Well, you know, your vote needs to count, and it's about integrity in the system at the end of the day. And for Lancaster and York County viewers, I think they might be happy to learn. We put a religious exemption in for our neighbors who are Amish and don't believe in photographs, photographic ID. There is a non-photographic ID available and usable for our Amish friends and neighbors as well. So very good. Well, Stan, thank you. I appreciate so much the opportunity to interview you today and our friendship and working together here on all these issues. You've been a champion on pro-growth, pro-business initiatives, and so much appreciate your leadership in the House of Representatives. So thank you very much, and appreciate you joining me here today. That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have comments or questions about these or any other legislative topic, my contact information will be on the screen in a moment. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for Legislative Report.